Hey folks, this is Emily. I want to talk with you in a different way. I want to talk with you a little bit about the future and the reality of the situation we're living in right now. This is a scary time to be climate aware or a person who's in touch with the earth, feeling the rapid change. I want to look at the data for a minute. I can understand wanting to stick to peer-reviewed data, but when we want to look at what's happening now, we have to look at what's happening now. Here we have Reddit user JH Madden, who has put together some nice graphics from climatereanalyzer.org. You might remember we've used that source before to look at sea surface temperatures. We can see that February has had some very hot days where we're at or above 2C in February in terms of overall warming. Looking at that another way, we see this post from Professor Elliot Jacobson showing some data from the Copernicus Institute. So that's an EU outfit that does the same sort of global temperature gathering. We can see that in March of 23, we spiked up and things got really weird, as we all know, this past winter, and continue to be quite weird on this red line as we look at 2024, where we look at February having a total global temperature increase pretty close to 1.8. Remember, the Paris Accords, we were trying to stay below 1.5 C. So, like, seeing 1.8 now, not desirable. We weren't even supposed to see this temperature transiently until 2035, according to consensus climate models like those published in the NCA 5. It's worth noting that as we see the La Nina system come in, it's likely to come in at April. Hopefully, we'll see some decreases on these global surface temperatures, but we got to keep an eye on the news. We got to keep an eye on the news as we make decisions, as we have our thinking. Professor Jacobson, I respect him. He says a sudden feeling of nausea and existential dread is a normal reaction. And I would say it is a normal reaction. But if I was the kind of person who was inclined to give up, I already wouldn't be here. If you are in the same kind of boat as me, let's talk about other ways to respond to this information. The first thing that I want to share related to this information is that substantial parts of the Prairie Pothole region model fairly well to 4C. The second thing that I want to do is talk about responding to threats with change in action. And to do that, I kind of got to bring in my partner here. Come here, Mike. Thank you for coming and being on the show.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Mike.
Hello.
It's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
He's from this region. His family has been in the Prairie Pothole region for, is it 8 generations now?
Yeah, something like that.
So as we work together, we want to work together to try and share some ethnographic information about what this region is like. If maybe you want to consider getting on like the ultimate collapse train and coming to the Prairie Pothole region, it's like, right?
Yeah,
Nobody knows what it's like here because there's like a lot of ways the weather wants to kill you here already. That's why it's so great in the case of collapses because it's already horrible here. We have like horrible blizzards. We have definite threat of wet bulb temperatures. You kind of got to have like a mole person portion of your house for ideal living.
But you needed that anyway for tornadoes.
It's true. It's true. There's many reasons why mole people are successful in this region. Mike and I have been through a lot of misadventures together.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that as we're looking at this climate data right now, it really reminds me of November of 2019, where, my doctorate's actually in microbiology. Most of my training up to my comps, when you get your master's equivalent, is related to infectious disease. So was I really nuts leading up to COVID?
It was intense, but it was also like good information,
Strange because I felt like there was a real tension in our life at that time where I would tell you all kinds of scary science stuff. And I wasn't like super friendly and positive about it. I was like, Mike, we're going to die.
Well, you were looking at the data in a way that I couldn't and no one else could. I mean, people I know can't do that. And obviously, the people on the news couldn't do it. And it seemed like a lot of people in the government couldn't do it.
Weird perspective on this because some of the research that I had done leading up to my graduate work was in the lab that decoded SARS coronavirus. So I had a lot of coronavirus experience. I was in Susan Baker's lab as a student. So, like the coronavirus, they can really mess you up, right? Like we're lucky that COVID turned out to be not SARS, which has something like a 60% disabling rate.
Right.
But even now, I can hear in my voice that I'm getting to like the too much science tune out point, right?
I might already be there.
And if you watch this channel, that I can have that problem where I too much science. So Mike is really useful as the person here who kind of helps to see when I'm nerding out too much and when we have like a real response moment, right?
Sure, sure. Well,
So
should we talk
yeah,
Prairie Pothole Region?
yeah.
I'm just going to use Iowa as like a shorthand. It's actually a little bit bigger. It doesn't exactly line up with Iowa, but
No,
when I talk about Iowa, that's where I'm from. That's my family's origin. So
when we're talking about the good stuff virgin, we're talking about Iowa, parts of Western Illinois, we're talking about Southern Minnesota, and we're talking about South Dakota. There's good stuff around there, but that's sort of the Prairie Pothole region forming up in the projections.
for me, what I think about that matters maybe more than anything is what is it like they say the Iowa farm, every farm feeds 200 people around the world, something like that.
Yeah,
Don't quote me on that number. It's something
it's
around that.
hundreds of people.
It's hundreds of people. Imagine your worst case collapse scenario where we lose 90% of that efficiency, and now farms here only feed 20 people per farm.
Only feed the people who are working the farm.
Then you're only talking about the people on the farm, people nearby.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather be one of the people nearby than be one of the people trying to get this food halfway around the world.
When you talk about energy scenarios too, the Prairie Pothole region is the most energy independent area in the US. Iowa's transition towards energy independence towards wind is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
We see the same thing occurring in South Dakota, I think. Have you heard that?
Well, South Dakota, it has a lot of natural gas also, so they're sort of in a mix
Well,
situation.
there's such a difference in the eastern and western halves of
Right,
South Dakota,
right.
where when we're talking about prairie pothole style outlooks, you're really talking about eastern South Dakota. The video for South Dakota is going to come out next week on Thursday, our normal state level drop.
Sure.
But talking about food and talking about power, you're talking about a lot of resilience in the region.
Yeah, and people is really the other like key ingredient. These are my people. I'm biased. Like Emily said, I'm an eighth generation Iowan, and I mean that's about as far back as it goes for white people, I think. And really, the Iowa settlement pattern when European immigrants came here, it was a mix. It was a mix of people from New England, from the Mid-Atlantic states, um, with new immigrant populations from Northwestern Europe, from Scandinavia, Germany. Um,
It was like whole villages from Europe,
it
right?
it was, and at the same time, there was no dominant group that got to Iowa. Everyone felt like a minority in a sense because everyone knew that they were part of the mosaic, they were part of the constellation, and there was no overarching sense of uniformity or a need to make everyone the same, make everyone live the same. You see this in religion, you have sort of patterns of denominationalism. You go into a small town in Iowa, there's 5 different churches. Someone like me, I can drive into a town and I can tell probably where people came from based on what sort of churches are in the area.
So I don't want to just brush off conquest. 'Cause it's not like this mix of friendly white people came in into a conveniently empty land and that was fine, right?
That is
We're
that is
talking,
something we have to reckon with,
you
of
know,
course.
there's the reality that this is a settlement by conquest situation. But when you are talking about that population, that's a white population coming
Hmm.
in Iowa, it is, I would agree, very unique how diverse it was, how upholding of religious and faith diversity. And I think that that is a reality that persists today in Iowa that is not necessarily true across the country. You know, one of the first Muslim mosques, the Mother Mosque, is in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
We see substantial Hindu religious sites in Iowa. We see substantial Jewish life in Iowa. And these are all thriving cultural elements in Iowa today.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not to say that no one has any bad things to say about anyone else, but there's a sort of denominational framework. What I mean by that is that there's not like one church that everyone in town goes to. There's always a mix. There's always options. There's always a sense that, we're together in our diversity, that we're together in what makes us different, what makes us unique, and that we can't fall back on sort of like tribal thinking because everyone marries everyone else. Everyone knows people who are part of the other groups. Um, and there is an awareness of cooperation and the need to, you know, just have like civic mindedness and have a rule of law and the Iowa, I like there are parts of the country where I would be nervous if my car broke down. Like who's gonna pull up next to me? I don't get nervous in Iowa. I mean, some of that's male privilege, I'm sure, but I don't get scared that bad things are going to happen when a stranger pulls up next to me in Iowa.
I've spent a lot of time with a terrible car in many economically disadvantaged parts of Iowa. And I would agree that there's an unusual diversity of thought and caretaking in this part of the world. There's a lot of linguistic diversity too. In my work in the Iowa public schools, I encountered many communities that spoke Russian, that spoke German, that spoke various ancestral forms of German and Dutch in the home,
Right.
and that spoke Spanish in the home as primary languages. So we're not talking about a monolithic society, and we're not talking about a society where I think there's a closed offness to new ideas.
Right.
I think that there's potential for new ideas to take place here. And I think that one of the things that unites people who stay in our uniquely terrible climate is our love of the land. I think
Oh,
that most people
absolutely.
here are very connected to the land, more than other places I've lived.
Yes, yes. And you see that in connections with not just farming but also with hunting. In our area, people do a lot of foraging. They do a lot of gathering berries and mushrooms, and when the asparagus comes up,
I was
people
just
go
gonna say
crazy.
that
Yeah.
asparagus is crazy. A lot of people go for nuts too in
Mhm.
the fall. There are a number of driveways in our town where people get like big 5-gallon buckets of the black walnuts and they dump them in the driveway so they can drive back and forth on them to shell them for a couple of weeks. I think that if you're a person who's interested in long haul thinking, we got to think about the Prairie Pothole region. We want to know what questions you have about the region in terms of culture, in terms of welcoming
Mhm.
character, in terms of legal frameworks, and in terms of other ways that you can think of to respond to the very serious state of climate in the news. I think that it is normal when you see things are going really bad to have like this dread reaction. But if we had stayed stuck in a dread response, knowing that COVID was coming, we would have been the many American families with no toilet paper.
It's true. It's true.
Instead, we had quite adequate toilet paper and other reserves, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And as we move towards a time where it's really hard not to see the writing on the wall in terms of great difficulties for people, in terms of great difficulties with housing costs. One of our responses to 2020 was to come out here to buy a home that was in a barely livable condition.
It was okay. It was all right. I mean,
It's survivable.
there were a lot of nails on the floor.
Talking about here, we're survivable conditions. Nails on the floor is okay. You know, we were able to acquire property that took us out of a cycle of urban renting and that has contributed enormously to the stability and to the resilience of our family unit. I think that there's a window that's rapidly closing to get yourself to a destination region and to get bought in at a rate that is accessible to typical Americans.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is an area where opportunity is still there, and the window is still open. If you're someone who wants to get on the train and ride it all the way to 4, like me, I'm not getting off the train. I'm riding it to the end. I know this is an unusual type of video, but I feel like it's time to have a different kind of conversation. If you're a person who has a dream of the prairie restored, if you're a person who dreams about living in Prairietown, let's talk. Let's it's out there. Let me know what you want to know in the comments, and Mike and I will try and figure it out for you for next week. What do you think?
Sounds like a plan.
Cool. Let's get ready. Talk to you soon. Folks, thanks for watching and thanks for joining us. AR has recently passed a milestone. We've reached more than 100,000 people in America with detailed local climate information, and it's thanks to the incredible support of the AR community. There are so many folks committing their financial resources, their energy, their time to helping this information get out there. I'm so grateful to all of you, and I'm so glad that we're doing this together. Thanks for being there with me. I'm going to keep an eye on the news. I'm going to keep an eye on high consensus science. I'm going to try and get you what you need as we go through this together.